what is your opinion on the Black Lives Matter movement in America? I was having this conversation with my brother today, and we
Yeah.
were talking about Aboriginal people in Australia and how one of the big things that it was based off a Louis Theroux documentary we saw recently. It was on Stan here in Australia, the streaming platform, talking about the high percentage of people, African Americans in this particular neighborhood. It may have been in Seattle. We're talking, 7-8 years ago. So we're not talking right now with Chaz and whatnot. But the percentage of black men who were involved with violent crime or had violent crime done toward them, the percentage of them who had fathers in prison was something like 80+%, something insane. And we were going back and we're trying to work out, okay, do you defund the police? Okay, well, you need police. All right, that's fine. Okay, back in the 60s, there was horrible systemic racism in America, and this perhaps led to having all these African-American people who couldn't get housing loans, couldn't get jobs in decent arenas, couldn't get into particular universities. And then for whatever reason, whether it's through necessity or whether it's through the people they're around, turn to crime, then they end up in jail and their kids don't have a father figure. This massive number of 80-something% of these young people who will end up in jail because they didn't have a father figure. It was something that I thought I didn't even think about. But this systemic racism, it goes back and it carries through, and it's a very divisive term because you look at it from someone like me and you go, well, I'm not racist. I don't care about color and stuff. And of course, saying that you don't care about color doesn't allow you to celebrate blackness or brownness, which also makes you racist. So just don't say anything, white boy. It's basically the thing that people are saying at the moment. But I think it is such a nuanced subject that no one on Twitter in 140 characters is getting it right, regardless of what side you're on.
No. So, I mean, firstly, I mean, that, the statistic you put out there, I mean, I believe if a boy grows up without a father, I believe they are 20 times more likely to go to prison.
Wow.
20 times, 30 times more likely to run away from home, something like 10 times more likely to be violent. Like, it has a massive effect. We need, I think that father absence and bad fathers and bad parenting in general is actually the root cause of the vast majority of social issues in the modern Western world. I legitimately believe that. People want to always go to economics or the system or this or that, and I'm like, man, look, the fatherlessness thing is the giant elephant in the room that people don't want to address and don't want to talk about because people get touchy about it, and people always think you're talking about them specifically, or they'll talk about exceptions. It's like, look, I'm not saying that everyone raised by a single mother, it turns like that's people struggle with nuances, as you probably know.
Sure.
And it's possible for two things to be true at once. So, I mean, I'm not sure what the exact question is there. I think there's a lot of stuff there. I mean, the first question you asked about the BLM movement, is that?
Well, there's no real question. I'm just sort of throwing shit around because I can't wrap my head around the entire thing because with Twitter, and this is where I learn most of my things about the particular protests that are happening at the moment. I jump on and I jump off Twitter. I'm very rarely on there for more than 30 minutes because I can't deal with it. There's too much shit going on because like 50 to 60% of the people I follow on Twitter are just there so I can get content. That's the only reason. But like from your point of view, someone who spends a lot of time on Twitter and someone who has the finger on the pulse of the social justice movement and politics in general, where do you see this movement going? It's obviously kicked off after the George Floyd situation. How does it end? What is the end game?
Wow. Okay. Well, I think what's interesting at the moment is in the last few days as we're recording this, is people are waking up to the fact that the Black Lives Matter organization, capital B, capital L, capital M, is not what they thought it was. And I've known this for 5 years, right? I put out a tweet 3 weeks ago. I put out a tweet that has got me into more trouble, both in my like literally even in my personal life, than anything I've ever put out. Out of 80,000 tweets, my most controversial tweet was me saying that I do not support the Black Lives Matter organization. I never have, and I never will. And I was pretty blunt about it. I wasn't particularly charitable towards them. And this is because the organization itself look, there are three different things, and this is it's annoying having to parse this out, but this is why they've called their organization that, so that if you say you don't support Black Lives Matter, people can call you racist, and they can say this and they can say that. The organization is one thing. This is an organization I believe was founded in 2014, I believe. And it's founded by two out of the three founders are self-admitted open Marxists. I believe they're both major parts of the LGBTQ community. They consider themselves radical thinkers and community organizers, etc. If you look on their websites, some of their stated goals include disrupting the nuclear family, which is a big problem given what you were just talking about. Defunding and ultimately abolishing the police is the goal for many of them. They've got a major LGBTQ agenda in there, which again, I'm not really sure what that has to do with Black Lives Mattering. They've got a bunch of stuff in there. In BLM UK, one of their stated goals is to also dismantle capitalism. So these are terrible goals. These are not things I'm not on board with any of this. I'm on board with the statement of Black Lives Matter, just like 100% of decent people are. But there's three things. There's the statement, Black Lives Matter, cool, everyone agrees. There's the sort of movement, Black Lives Matter, which may or may not be connected to the organization, depending on the scenario and the place. And then there's the organization itself. So when I am very, very heavily critical of Black Lives Matter, I'm talking about the organization there. And then in terms of the movement, I have my criticisms of the movement. The movement is more, I'm half on board with it, half on board not, because one, it's way too narrow in scope. It's extremely myopic, because if you're going to call a movement Black Lives Matter, then I think you really need to take that all the way, right? You can't just be talking about the 0.001% of black people who happen to be killed by a white police officer, right? That's not, if you're trying to save black lives, that's a really weird thing to be totally focused on, because if you're looking at the USA even, where this is supposedly the biggest problem, I believe 14 unarmed black people were killed by the police last year, okay? About 7,500 black people were murdered, right? So if I'm looking at those two numbers and I'm trying to work out, okay, I'm pushing for Black Lives Matter, I know which one of those things I'm going to focus on. Also, when it comes to the police issue, 70% of the people killed by the police are not black in America, right? And keep in mind, most of the killings are justified, by the way, because there's normally people who are attacking the cops and putting their lives in danger. But even still, even out of the ones that are questionable, it's the minority that are black. So narrowly putting it through this racial lens and purely viewing it as a racial issue is missing the point. It's totally missing the point. And I think that, look, you can look at the results. Sure, there has been good that's come out of this, but also it's increasing division. It's increasing polarization. It's making people see race more. It's creating conflict between, and it's stupid conflict, right? Someone says Black Lives Matter, someone says all lives matter, and they're at each other's throats, despite the fact that both of those statements are very obviously true. Someone says white lives matter and they get fired from their job. Yeah. So the whole thing is just, it's dumb. It's like, look, can we take this conversation up a level to the point where everybody agrees, right? We all agree that police brutality is bad, right? No innocent person should die unnecessarily at the hands of a police officer. We're all in agreement on that. We shouldn't discriminate or be unkind or cruel to people based on the color of their skin. Racism is bad. Like every decent person agrees with that. So it's like, okay, cool. Why don't we go to the stage where we all agree, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or liberal or conservative, whatever, we all agree on these things. So why not try to solve the problem at that issue? Sorry, at that level, right? Okay, we can agree. Okay, yeah, sure. There seems to be some problem with some of these police forces in the U.S. They seem to be overly aggressive. Some people may think that's only towards a certain race, but this happens towards all races. So that's clearly a problem. It seems like oftentimes they get away with it as well. They're not getting prosecuted for when they do have some of these very unfortunate and unfair killings, whether this is Daniel Shaver or it's Philando Castile, a white guy and a black guy. There are different cases. You had the Tony Timpa case. Now we've got the George Floyd case. I don't know what the result of that is going to be. So it's just like, look, instead of getting dragged into the weeds and putting people at each other's throats all the time, why don't we just sort of agree on the core issue and not get bogged down in this? You know, this person is screaming about systemic and institutional racism. This person is saying, you know, the perspective I'm coming from, saying, no, it's a general police brutality issue, etc. And yeah, I don't know. I think in the long term, if people like, I think if people could put away the emotions for a side and just kind of come onto my page and be like, okay, look, like this is what we're trying to solve. Stop pulling down statues and stop like, you know, having people not be allowed to voice cartoon characters because they're the wrong skin.
Oh,
They don't match the skin color, or
that is
trying to
insane. That is
bat. And then people have just gone off the ledge, right? You know, ban Gone with the Wind. Aunt Jemima's canceled. Uncle Ben's rice is
yeah.
I'm just like, you're canceling fictional characters like food mascots based on the color of their skin in the name of anti-racism. I'm like, you have lost the plot, right?
Yeah.
You're pulling down statues of George Washington and Thomas. You've lost the plot, right? You're trying to pull down statues of Jesus because you think he's white. Like, I'm just like, look, everybody. Can we just be some adults here, right? Like, how did this all stem from a man in Minnesota being killed by a police officer, right? Like, what's even going on here? It's just like, I call it emotional incontinence. It's just like emotions just flying out everywhere. And I'm like, look, if we want to actually solve the problem, then we need to just like chill and talk and get to the root of it. So that's my thought.